Ooh, this just came in. Everyone's been talking about this lens and getting it, so I wanted to see what all the hype and fuss was about, so I bought one just for you. So let's check it out. Now, this is a lens that a lot of people and creators have been talking about, so I decided to pick one up just to see what all the hype was about. So this is LAOWA's latest 10mm F2.8, and it's probably one of the coolest lenses because this is its first in its kind to have an autofocusing capability at f2.8. Now, typically you wouldn't see something like this, and with the latest video trend of super wide angles coming out, we're seeing a lot of creators pick this lens up and using them to create some really unique shots. So now that I have one, we're going to talk about the build of the lens, what to expect from this, and how it actually looks. And let me tell you, this lens is pretty darn cool. Now, starting off with the build, for a lens this small, it only weighs about 420 grams, which is barely over a pound. So packing this in a bag is pretty ideal. Now, the whole premise of this lens is the fact that this is a full frame autofocusing lens at 10mm, which is like really wide. Now, this lens does come in a metal build, so it is pretty durable for the most part. If I'm going to be dropping this lens, at least I know it can take a slight beating. It does have a focus ring on the outside, as well as an autofocus and manual focus toggle right on the end here. The focus ring does have a textured grip to it, and it does have a flat side so you can grip something as well when you're rotating or focusing throughout. And something to note about this lens is that it doesn't actually have any USB-C connection on the end for any firmware lens updates, just because you can do it through your cameras typically. So that's how they decided to do it as well. Not a big issue at all. All you have to do is just put your lens onto your body and just connect it through your port on the camera body itself. Easy peasy. Now, typically with wider lenses, you'll find that they have a fisheye glass element over the end here, which kind of bulbs out for the most part, except this one has a very small and minimal one all the way in the center, spanning at around 3 centimeters on the end glass element here. You don't have a lot of glass kind of exposed, which also means that a lot of the glass on the inside will tend to be a lot bigger, hence the thicker look to it. But because of that, you actually get a removable lens hood and a threaded filter on the end. With a 77mm thread on the end here, you're actually able to put some filters on the end of a wide angle lens for once, except there's some limitations. But we'll get into that later. Now, because it does have an autofocusing element on the inside here, there is some limitations in terms of aperture, in that it stops down at f2.8, which is great, but it only has a 5-blade aperture inside, meaning your bokeh won't look as bokeh-licious or as round. Now, they do come with a manual version of this lens, and it does have a 14-blade aperture, but this one has autofocus, so I'll take that. Now, with such a compact build, you're probably wondering how good that glass is on the inside. And thankfully, that's what we're here to talk about. Now, if you haven't noticed, this actually says Zero-D, which stands for zero distortion. Because typically for wider lenses, you're going to find that the glass sort of bends the edges around in order to get that wider field of view. If you can sort of tell on the edges here, this is my 16-35 from Sony, and this area is a little squished at times, or even here you'll notice that some of the walls, they're just like kind of bowing. Not a big issue, and it can be corrected in post if you really think about it. But with this one at an even wider field of view at 10mm, it's crazy what it can actually do. Because on the LAOWA 10mm, you're getting 130.4 degrees of view, which is insane for a lens like this. As you can see, I'm getting like an edge-to-edge look almost, while not completely a 180 degree, and I'd say it's pretty close to the human eye, which is pretty darn cool. Every time I throw this lens onto the camera, it kind of feels like I'm immersing myself with the audience, and I'm kind of giving them that POV of what I would be seeing. Now, obviously, while it does say Zero-D, it isn't exactly completely without distortion, except this is probably the only lens right now that has near zero distortion, and it actually looks decent for once. Now, because this lens was made for the photographer in mind, you're getting a lot of contrast and sharpness in the actual glass. There isn't going to be any kind of character for this lens, and it's going to be very clean and clear for a lot of photographers and videographers using this. This wasn't meant to have that cool hipster vintage look to it, which makes it more usable for a wider range of people. Now, I find this quite impressive just because of how much you're able to capture. It's perfect for astrophotographers, anyone that likes to do landscapes, or even if you like to do video and get that really cool angle. You know who you are. And what's really cool is that recently I've been using the POV helmet I have here and just kind of mounting it to a camera, getting that really unique perspective of how I would actually look when I'd be walking around. Now, I'd even say that this is a pretty darn good lens, especially if you're doing real estate photography, because if you know how wide you need to get, especially if you're in those tight spaces or you just want to make something look massive. Hey, don't give me ideas. Now, I did say that there was some limitation to this lens, especially if you're trying to use a filter. Now, because you are putting something on the front here, you may be disrupting the field of view by adding on a filter. And if you're like me, you probably own a lot of 82mm filter threads instead and adapt everything using a step-up ring or something similar. Now, using that step-up ring with the additional filter might add a little bit of distortion. And because you are using a combination of a step-up ring, a filter, and then the lens, that's when you start to see the edges get covered just a tiny bit. So pretty much anything past this here, you're gonna see a little bit on the edges, because that's how wide this lens actually is. And if you didn't notice, this was actually a tulip lens hood. So there's these little parts that actually indent back in or recess back in, which kind of bypass the edges of the sensor, so you don't actually see the lens hood in any of your footage. Now, some of the ways that I did find myself bypassing that is either cropping in on post or just using the action mode for your stabilization in your Sony cameras. Or if you own any camera with an IBIS system built in, it probably does the same thing. Now, to me, it's not a big issue because I can, for once, throw a filter over my wide angle lens without having to worry. Now, what's really cool about this lens as well is the fact that it has a 12cm minimum focus, which is like really close. Now, I did find myself getting even closer at 2cm, which is even crazier to me, and I was able to get some really cool angles and shots with that unique perspective. Now, to me, as a creator and a videographer, this is perfect for when I want to get that one, really cool angle, and two, getting crops for shorts and for regular long form videos. That way I can still crop in at a 16:9 ratio while still getting everything I need in frame. And because you'll typically find distortion happening on the edges of your lens here, the footage from the middle, especially if you're cropping for vertical video, is usually usable. Now, something that you might not know about this lens is that it actually has a star streak filter effect kind of happening all on the inside. You don't need a filter, you don't need an additional effect. On the inside, you actually get that star streak going on. And as you can see with these shots, it's great in low light and it gives you that certain flare. Get it? Because it's like a flare. Wow. Now, I know most of you want to know, how well is that autofocus? All right, let's be real here. At 10mm, there really isn't a lot that you need to focus on, because with a wide angle like this, everything is in frame and you'll pretty much be getting everything in focus from your infinity. Now, the autofocus really comes in handy when you get super close, or at least getting a medium distance to get that certain look. Now, to give you a real-time look at this footage, you can see it focusing from a minimum to around 2 feet in front of me. And in terms of focus breathing at a wide angle like this, it's really hard to tell, but it's kind of minimal, not too much. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't, or at least I try to ignore it. But because it's so wide, it's really hard to tell. Now, the autofocus is pretty quick and accurate though, which is a good thing, because if I do want to be doing some POV angles, or if I'm just walking around wanting to just shoot or film some video, this is really cool and handy, where if I want to show a product right in front of me while also filming my surroundings, I get that really nice immersive look without having to compromise anything. Now, the aperture is not fixed and you're able to stop down at around 2.8 all the way to 22 and still have autofocusing capabilities all throughout. Now, for a whopping $1,300, Is it worth it? Now, as you can tell in the recent months, there's been a lot of technology being displayed throughout our lenses. So you're finding a lot of lenses currently are going through a modernization process here. And with the technological advancements, you're getting an almost zero distortion look and a super wide angle, which has never been seen before. And for the size that you're getting it in with autofocus, it's really convenient for those that just want to run and gun and just have that cool angle on you at all times. Yes, it is a fixed lens, and at 10 millimeters, it's kind of hard to get a variety of different kind of shots. But one of the advantages to this lens is the very minimal focus distance here, and also make it look slightly different compared to the rest. Now, I don't think it's essential to have a focal range like this at all times, but it definitely creates a nice addition to your arsenal. And I feel like this would be the widest I would ever go in terms of my focal lengths. So anything lower than a 10 millimeter, I don't think I'll ever need. And because this is already so wide, I'm kind of filling that gap after the 16. Plus, because of this size and weight, I really don't mind bringing this lens around. It's kind of like a 50 millimeter, just a little bit thicker. And with the additional f-stop at 2.8, it's great in low light, and I don't have to worry about pushing my ISO in my footage. But that's about it. If you like this video, let me know in the comments down below, or if you just want to subscribe, that'd be cool too. All right, anyways, it is 10:30, early for once. I'm gonna go eat.